Hi, Casey. Thanks for inviting me on just to talk for a few minutes about religious trauma syndrome, and in particular about purity culture and the devastating impacts that harsh fundamentalist indoctrination can have on so many people. My name is Janice Selbie. I'm a registered professional counselor located in British Columbia, Canada, and I also work as a religious recovery consultant. My area of interest is religious trauma syndrome. And that is a phrase that was coined by my friend and mentor, Dr. Marlene Winnell, about 30 years ago. And when she made up that phrase, religious trauma syndrome, Dr. Winnell was talking about the symptoms that can accompany being part of a high demand, rigid authoritarian group, and also symptoms then that we suffer when we leave that group. So when we're inside of a high demand group, our freedom is limited, relationships, friendships, and the way that we dress. I know for myself, I wore a head covering for years and just very long skirts of dresses, certainly no makeup or jewelry, not even a wedding ring. The things that I could watch or read or listen to were also very limited. Nothing secular, of course, was permitted. And so when I eventually left my religious beliefs behind, I like to say that I divorced religion. Well, it was very liberating. There were also losses then that I suffered as a result of leaving. I lost my community. I lost my support. I lost my sense of identity and the built-in purpose, sense of purpose that comes along with religion as well. So I really was plunged into a time of existential crisis when I divorced religion. At that time, I also divorced my husband, who was a minister, and I had homeschooled our daughters. I went back to school to become a counselor, registered professional counselor. And while I was doing that, I was, of course, being confronted with my own issues of trauma related to religion. But I didn't even have the words for it, religious deconstruction or deconversion. All I knew was I had a very strong, secure belief system. I was extremely devout. I really believed the Bible with all my heart. And then suddenly I didn't believe anymore, and I couldn't make myself believe ever again. And I didn't know anyone else who had walked away, who'd been as devout as I had, and then who left their faith. So for a few years, it was very lonely. And all I could think to do was research and learn as much as I could about cults, every different type of cult, becoming radicalized, becoming extremist in our thinking, how that happens to humans. Because I recognized, even though I didn't see at the time, I didn't feel that I had been a member of a cult, but it was more of a mainstream religious belief system. I still recognized that there were parallels. There were things that absolutely fit in under the category of people who were recovering from being involved in cults. And then eventually, I was very pleased to find Dr. Marlene Winnell online. And Dr. Winnell's organization is called Journey Free. You can visit her by going to www.journeyfree.org. And she really is a pioneer in the field of religious trauma and religious trauma recovery work. So I saw a clip of Dr. Winnell being interviewed on a news show, and then I was able to track her down, find her, and connect with her, and attend some of her retreats in person, which were very healing and helpful. And of course, I always recommend her book, which is called Leaving the Fold, and it's a great guide for people who are leaving their fundamentalist religions and authoritarian groups. So I connected with Dr. Winnell and was learning more and more about religious trauma and how I was still being impacted by my own religious trauma. And then I decided to make a workshop for people recovering from religious trauma. It's called the Divorcing Religion Workshop. And then after that, I figured, you know what, we need to have some conferences. So I came up with the Conference on Religious Trauma, also known as CORT, CORT. And I just finished this year's court in 2022. And now I'm preparing for another inaugural event, a conference that's never been done before. And the conference is called Shameless Sexuality, Life After Purity Culture. And this is also going to be an online event held in October. You can go to shamelesssexuality.org. And there you'll find out about the conference and tickets and so forth. So part of growing up certainly in the very evangelical fundamentalist group, and then the Mennonite group that I subsequently became involved with, part of that was a heavy emphasis on modesty and on females being covered up. So the concept was that males are unable to control themselves. They're very easily stimulated by anything visual. So females are needed to be entirely chaste and almost invisible. You're just not ever supposed to dress or speak or do anything that might cause a brother to stumble. Ooh, I know some of you are very familiar with that, with that phrase. And so that's how it was for me too. And that's how I was raising my daughters. So I felt strongly that my daughters should be keepers of the home. So they were to just learn about what was required for homemaking. Cooking, baking, cleaning, those sorts of things. And of course, they were also to be very knowledgeable about scripture. And I and they were to be really careful not to usurp any man's authority or, my husband's authority because he was given to me as my spiritual head. I 100% believed this, and I found it so painful at times. In fact, that's even why I started wearing a head covering. It was a reminder to myself that I was subject to my husband, my then husband, and that I was to respect him and honor him, and be subject to him. And since that doesn't come entirely naturally to me, I felt that I needed that constant reminder by wearing the head covering. Of course, it wasn't my husband's insistence. He is not the one that told me I had to do that. I simply was very fundamentalist and felt super comfortable with rules. I felt uncomfortable with freedom and having to make my own choices and decisions about life, and even about things as simple as what would be appropriate to wear. And of course, I liked that feeling of righteousness that I had of being so holy when I only wore my long skirts and dresses and my head coverings, and people would notice me in public for how holy I was. And I certainly put the pressure on my daughters that they were not to date, they were not to be involved in the lives of boys or have any, male friends. And so my the corset of Christianity was ever tighter on me until finally one day, that thing just snapped. It was not going any tighter. And in fact, I couldn't take it anymore. That corset busted open and I came tumbling out. And it was a real shocking thing for me as I started confronting all of my beliefs and trying to hold them up to the light of day, and just seeing that they wouldn't anymore. I lost my faith. And so now I work specifically with others who are recovering from religious trauma. And when we're talking about purity culture, So females are taught that they basically have to be invisible, but it also impacts males raised in purity culture because they are taught that their thoughts are sinful. Their natural inclinations are sinful as far as sexuality and curiosity, masturbation, anything like that. So boys and girls are both taught that, but the onus is so heavy. It's just very difficult. The males and females aren't to have any sexual knowledge, any carnal knowledge, until suddenly on their wedding night, it's supposed to be this magic switch that gets flipped, and then they can just enjoy and have a blissful night of amazing, blessed sexual intercourse. And of course, that's rarely the case. They don't know their own body, their own plumbing. They certainly don't understand their new spouse, or how to make things pleasurable or enjoyable, or what's involved. And there can also be such a tremendous sense of shame that is carried into the marriage bed, because children and young people have been taught that sex is shameful, their bodies are shameful, and they might not have even a cursory idea about what feels good for them, what might feel good for their partner. They, certainly have been taught that they must never watch porn, not even ethical porn, or learn about sexuality. And so, of course, this also has a huge impact on our LGBTQ two-spirit IA plus community as well, who are taught that they're not right. They're not the same. They're not the cookie cutter. And so any attractions or inclinations that they may have as far as sexuality and sexual identity goes, and even gender identity, those things are, unless it's the typical male, female, sex only within the confines of heterosexual marriage, they're made to feel less than. And this can have such a profound impact on mental health. So I want to invite everyone who's watching and participating in your show today to consider attending the upcoming Shameless Sexuality Life After Purity Culture Conference. And if you're not able to attend, perhaps you know someone who's been harmed by purity culture indoctrination. Pass it along to them. It'll be extremely informative. We have sex therapists, religious trauma therapists, social workers who have developed programs specifically around purity culture recovery, dating. We'll be looking at different types of relating, the poly world, or just all sorts of different ideas about sexuality and relating that maybe have been off limits before. People haven't been allowed to consider them. People are just curious about them. I think it'll be a wonderful and empowering event, and I really hope you can all join us there. Feel free to send me an email if you have questions. I know Casey will put links in the show for you all. Thanks again. Take care.